The critics and the public are hailing The Irishman as a return to form for Martin Scorsese. It's all the right ingredients to clean up this award season. It's set a few decades ago, it's very, very long, 3.5 hours long to be exact, and, of course, it's based on a true story. Or maybe it isn't. In recent months, a lot of people have been coming out and pointing to some obvious flaws and exaggerations in the book that inspired the movie, calling into question just how true this movie is. Today, we'll be breaking down everything we know about The Irishman and its maybe factual source. So what is The Irishman about? Generally, it's about the boss of a union chapter, one of the dozens of people who claim to have killed the infamous Jimmy Hoffa. The movie is largely adapted from a 2004 book called I Heard You Paint Houses. The book is an interview of the man who has become the main character of The Irishman. The interview takes place in the months before his death, and supposedly he's got a lot to get off his chest. He says he was first contacted by Jimmy Hoffa on the phone. Hoffa apparently said, "I heard you paint houses," which is a euphemism meaning, "I heard you're a contract killer." The paint is splattering blood. This man claims that he assassinated Hoffa and 25 to 30 others. He can't remember exactly how many. Or is he just trying to build a legacy and an inheritance for his family? We'll have to take a look at everyone involved. So, who is the guy who's now had a whole movie based on him? His name is Frank Sheeran, and he was born in a suburb outside of Philadelphia in 1920. He grew up during the Depression, and until the age of 21, he didn't do anything outside of the ordinary, mostly working odd jobs. But then, just before Pearl Harbor, he joined the army. In 1943, after the US had joined the war, he was deployed to North Africa. He ended up fighting in Italy, France, and Germany, serving more than 400 days, which, in World War II, was 4 times the average. This is where we can start to check in on the movie's credibility. In the movie, Sheeran claims that he was deployed for 414 days, and alludes to the fact that he committed war crimes in Germany. All of this is referenced in the 2003 book. In it, Sheeran describes being part of the Dachau liberation reprisals, an event that's usually not referred to as a massacre because the 35 to 50 people who were massacred were the guards of a brutal concentration camp. He also described how officers ordered him to force German prisoners to dig their own shallow graves. Sheeran says that these tasks prepared him for his alleged mob life. It was just like when an officer would tell you to take a couple of German prisoners back behind the line and for you to hurry back. You did what you had to do. After returning from the war, Sheeran got involved with 2 connected organizations, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and the Bufalino family. This is where the truth gets a bit murky though. The movie is based on the book and does not stray from the facts presented in it. There are even a few quotes here and there, but the book is simply an interview with Sheeran and a lot of people think he's lying. No one is questioning his experiences in the war, but the overwhelming majority of experts involved in the Hoffa case don't think that Sheeran was the one who did it. Same for the murder of Joe Gallo in Umberto's clam house. The consensus around the clam crime is that it was committed by a short Italian man named Carmine Sonny Pinto de Base. Sheeran is not short. He's 6'4" and weighs almost 200 pounds. Frank Story, an FBI agent in charge of organized crime in New York, thinks it's outrageous that Sheeran committed this crime. Here's how he said it. "That's just crazy," he said. "He didn't do it. He never would have gone to New York to do that. It just wouldn't have happened." As for the Hoffa hit, nobody really knows who did it. But also, almost nobody thinks it was Sheeran. After Hoffa disappeared, the FBI investigated it as a murder, and they wrote about all the possible suspects in a memo. Sheeran makes the list under the heading, Suspects Outside of Michigan. The entry on him says this: resides in Philadelphia, and is a known associate of Russell Bufalino, La Casa Nostra chief, Eastern Philadelphia. His vehicle is seen at a meeting of La Cosa Nostra figures in Pennsylvania, August 29th, 1975, and also in Detroit, December 4th, 1975, during FJG appearance of New Jersey Teamsters, known to be in Detroit area at the time of Jimmy R. Hoffa's disappearance, and considered to be a close friend of Jimmy Hoffa. The FBI was confident that Salvatore Sallybugs was involved in an actual disappearance of Hoffa. But it's not just the law that doubts Sheeran's story. Mobsters are skeptical too. Take John Carlyle, for example. He was the head of Philly's Irish mob for years, and he said that Frank Sheeran never killed a fly. The only thing he ever killed were countless jugs of red wine. You could tell how drunk he was by the color of his teeth. Pink? Just started. Dark purple? Stiff. And then, Sheeran himself told Philadelphia Daily News in the 90s that, "I did not kill Hoffa, and I had nothing to do with it." But he also told them who he thought was really guilty, the President of the United States, Richard Nixon. There's another strange thing about Sheeran's admission of guilt. He never technically admits to anything. When describing both murders, he says that the victims got shot. He never says, "I shot." Here's how he described the shooting of Joey Gallo. "A split second after I turned to face the table, Crazy Joey's driver got shot from behind. Crazy Joey swung around out of his chair and headed down toward the corner door to the shooter's right. It was easy to cut him off by going straight down to the bar and getting right behind him. He made it through Umberto's corner door to the outside. Crazy Joey got shot about 3 times outside the restaurant, not far from the corner door." Charles Brandt, the author of I Heard You Paint Houses, claims that Sheeran is being smart by doing this. The passive voice allows him to tell the story without explicitly saying that it was him who fired the shots. Brandt says that, if anything, it adds to Frank Sheeran's credibility. Maybe, but he's still never admitted to any of these crimes. Jimmy Hoffa's story is one of the most famous in the history of crime. It's very hard to avoid hearing his name, especially if you listen to rap music. But who is he? In the movie, he's played by Al Pacino. In real life, he was a contradictory figure. He was the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, one of the biggest labor unions in the world. As the president of the union, he was fighting for the rights of blue-collar workers. But to secure those rights, he got involved in some legal gray areas, like investing the Teamsters pension fund into the development of Las Vegas, a known mob venture. There was also a ton of mob ties within the union itself. Sheeran, for one, was the president of a local chapter in Delaware. Bill Bufalino was a lawyer who officially represented the Teamsters from 1947 until 1971. But afterwards, he continued to work with his friend Jimmy until his disappearance 4 years later. Bufalino was accused by Robert Kennedy, who was then the Attorney General, of having connections to organized crime. And he most certainly did, through his cousin Russell, who was the Don of the Northern Pennsylvania Costa Nostra family, and was generally held to be a big-time ruthless mafia boss. In the movie, he's played by Joe Pesci. The FBI report on Bufalino is apparently more than 1,000 pages long, and was instrumental in bringing together the 5 families of New York, even before Hoffa and the unions came on the scene in such a big way. He was born in Sicily and moved to the States when he was only 3 years old. As a teenager, he got into crime and, as a young man, during Prohibition, became a bootlegger. He rose in the ranks for the next few decades and eventually became the boss of his family. Frank Sheeran was definitely associated with him. How much, no one can say exactly, but the FBI apparently saw him driving in a car with Bufalino in Detroit around the same time as Hoffa's disappearance. So how much should we actually believe? In short, it's very hard to say. But there are a few things that are absolutely concrete. There's the fact that this whole story centers around Hoffa getting out of jail and trying to reestablish control over the union. Sheeran, as the boss of the chapter of the union, is at least partially involved in this way. Then there's the FBI report. It describes Sheeran as a close friend of Jimmy R. Hoffa. In The Irishman, Sheeran is the one who assassinates Hoffa because he's the last one Hoffa would expect. Bufalino wanted Hoffa gone because he drew too much attention to the mob and their union dealings. The fact that Sheeran was also associated with Bufalino makes him the natural choice to carry out the hit. Plus, Sheeran was, as the FBI report says, known to be in the Detroit area at the time of Jimmy's disappearance. Then comes the weird stuff. Sheeran makes some other unbelievable claims in the book that, depending on your opinion of him to begin with, will either make him sound like he's closely connected to America's levers of power, or a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist trying to get famous. He said that, in 1962, he was the go-between for the mob and the CIA in their joint venture to invade Cuba. His bosses gave him the keys to a truck full of weapons and military uniforms, which he drove to a dog track in Florida. At the dog track, he handed it all over to a CIA agent. Years later, he took a suitcase filled with $500,000 in cash to a hotel in Washington. Then the Attorney General, John Mitchell, came and sat down beside him. After making a bit of small talk, then he walked away with the money, apparently to give it to his boss, Tricky Dick. Then there's the craziest one of all. In November 1963, Sheeran went to meet a guy in a Brooklyn restaurant who handed him a duffel bag with 3 rifles in it. He was told to deliver them to a pilot, which he did. The pilot left with the guns, and then, days later, President John F. Kennedy was shot. Sheeran implies that Lee Harvey Oswald, or whoever actually did it, used the guns that he delivered. Now, we're not going to get into too much Kennedy family conspiracy theories, but Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, was also assassinated in 1968 after leading a huge crackdown against organized crime, including the Bufalino family. Not only does this stuff go straight to the top, it's at least as convincing as Robert De Niro's de-aged face on his hobbling 76-year-old body. Have you managed to get through all 3.5 hours of The Irishman? If so, what did you think? Was it worth your whole evening? And who shot JFK? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Screen Rant for all your conspiracy theory needs.